Hey everyone, welcome to Be the Change. My name is Lily Mott, and today's episode is about how change comes when you say yes before you're ready. This week's guest is Jodie Bailey-Ho, who, among many other roles, is a climate justice campaigner and the founder of Teach the Teacher, which we talk a little bit more about throughout this episode. I really enjoy talking with Jodie about her work and learning about what inspired her to get started. So without further ado, let's dive into this episode featuring Jodie Bailey-Ho.
So I'm Jodie, I'm 21 from the UK, and I have done a lot of work over the past sort of 5 to 6 years at the intersection of climate change, education, and young people. So working with the UK government to embed sustainability into the education system, working in classrooms with young people to go and give workshops to teachers about climate change, working at an international scale to try and get ministers to commit to including education across the world on climate change. So yeah, loads of different things, but mainly putting young people sort of at the heart of the education system, and encouraging them to sort of push forward on learning about sustainability, and the importance of having a green future.
I love that. I think that the importance of including young people in what they're learning and encouraging them to think about that even and kind of get more involved in that is
Yeah.
incredible. And I love that. Tell me about what got you started with this work.
Oh,
What
yeah, yeah.
we'll go all the way back. What inspired you to get started with all of this?
There's sort of two sort of separate things, because when I first started movement, it was sort of being inspired by Greta and all the sort of media pieces on it in 2019, and thinking, oh, this is really interesting. I'd really love to go and do that, but I wasn't allowed to because my parents thought it would be sort of too dangerous. 'Cause I was quite young, it's also obviously a privilege to protest, and at that point, just that just wasn't an accessible option for me. So I joined the organization that was sort of hosting the strikes in the UK, and wanted to help organize. And I ended up doing a lot with the schools group of that organization. And that felt like that was the most relevant to me because I was quite young, I was still in school. So it felt, yeah, natural for me to sort of go into that path. That's how everything sort of started. And then, as is the way with sort of campaigning, things tend to like snowball. You take on more projects, you go and or volunteer with different organizations. That's exactly what happened to me. And then we fast forward a couple of years. This is when I was still volunteering with that organization, but also with another one called Teach the Future, which is a campaign here in the UK to rapidly reorientate the education system around the severity of the climate crisis. And that was, again, hosted by an organization called SOS, Students Organizing for Sustainability, who I'm still working with now, like 5 years later, which is crazy. But I was sort of being mentored by the director of this organization. And then at the time, I was about 17 years old. So in the UK, when you're 17, 18, you're doing your A levels. And I was doing chemistry. And one of my teachers at the time was a climate denier. And it was like blowing my mind because did not understand how this teacher, who was teaching literal science, did not sort of seem to believe in the climate crisis, or was sending me emails saying why it didn't exist and articles saying why it was fake and all the graphs were wrong. And so I was speaking to the people at SOS saying, look, I just don't understand what I can do about this. I I know this is wrong and I want to do something, but I'm sort of at a loss. And then together we sort of were talking about what if we went to teach this teacher about climate change, because there's actually a wider problem. 71% of teachers do not feel adequately equipped to teach their students about the climate crisis. So sort of a catch-22, because there's loads of young people that want to know about it, but there's people that can't teach it, they don't know how, or they're actively denying it. So that was where sort of Teach the Teacher came from, which is was one of my sort of major projects that I was working on.
I think that that is such a wonderful overview of everything, and it makes so much sense as to why you're so passionate about it. I was laughing quietly when you were talking about the
I know
climate
it's
change.
so bad.
That is just wow. Yeah. And I think that you've managed to take a lot of those feelings of frustration and turn it into positive change and ways that you could actually make a difference, which I think is incredible.
I think it's quite funny how I'm now at university, like about to start my last year at university studying environmental science. So he clearly it didn't have that much of an effect on me.
Love that. It's come full circle in the best ways.
Yeah.
I think that's wonderful. So, can you tell me about how you have found community through this work? It feels like you've worked with a bunch of different organizations, and I think that you've done it so well where you looked for existing resources and have kind of positioned yourself to make the most of some of those organizations and be very involved in them. Can you tell me about that feeling?
Mhm.
Because I've actually spoken with a good amount of climate activists from the UK actually as well, so I'm sure you know a lot of them. But I think that that is something that is really incredible that a lot of them talk about. How has that been for you? Does it really make an impact on your work to have other people who are passionate about these issues? Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that it's testament to the sort of community that we do have in the movement that sort of everyone else you've spoken to has said the same thing, because I completely agree. I think it's one of the like I wouldn't say it's like oh like it's the main thing that keeps me going, but when you are struggling and a lot of people in the movement do face burnout quite often, there's always people that understand the struggle, that are passionate about the same things that you are, and that are always willing to support you and keep pushing in the fight essentially. I've met some of my closest friends from organizations that I volunteered with, and I think it's also quite funny because I think the climate education space and, well, the climate movement in general is quite small. Everyone does seem to know each other, which can make it seem a bit exclusive, but it's not at all. And it's funny because you'll go to like these conferences or events that you'll see someone speaking at, and then you'll know quite a few of the people there just from the nature of the work that you're doing, and you're all sort of in similar spaces. I think it's really nice that there is such a community in the movement, because that's where that support comes from. Um, in general, at a grassroots level, that's where you find sort of the most passion, and there's a network of people that can be there for you. I'm sort of saying the same things, but yeah, I agree with what everyone else has said essentially, and it's really nice that everyone has said that that was so important to them.
I love that. And it's incredible. I think often I also hear from climate activists that there can be such a feeling of burnout and
Yeah,
loneliness and feeling like you might be the only one who cares about these issues. So having that group of people around you that you can commiserate with and that you
yeah,
can plan with and discuss some of these issues is so important. Off of that topic, can you tell me about if you've ever felt feelings of burnout or climate anxiety? I know that's kind of a buzzword.
yeah.
So, if you've experienced some of that, how do you deal with those feelings? What is that like for you? How have you dealt with that on your journey throughout climate activism? If you feel comfortable talking about it, I'd love
Yeah, of
to hear some of
course.
that.
I don't think it sort of ever got to the like extent of bad burnout or bad anxiety, but I was first sort of working with Teach the Future literally just before the pandemic started. So going into the pandemic, I found that like really difficult for a number of reasons, because it was also sort of the first time I was learning properly about climate change for myself, because obviously didn't learn at all about it in school, or had very varying experiences of it at school. Was learning about climate change properly for the first time, learning about what climate justice was. Those things are scary in themselves. And then also going into this time of not really being able to see anyone, worrying about, health and family, and the whole world experiencing this awful disease. I think those two things literally at the same time I found quite difficult. But then because it was like I said, the start of me volunteering with Teach the Future, everything went online, but it meant that everyone else was experiencing those same things too. And we had this sort of, again, it comes back to community, this shared sort of space on Zoom where we could talk about what was going on, but equally what we're doing within Teach the Future to sort of tackle that and keep pushing, even though we had lost so much of this momentum on climate education. What can we do now to sort of come back from this pandemic in a way that would make us stronger as a group. So that was definitely, what helped me during that period. And I think that climate anxiety can definitely be alleviated by turning it into agency, which is exactly what I did, whether I realized that I was doing it or not. So, yeah, I mean, now I'm a lot more sort of positive about things because I've sort of grown the past 5 years with those same people, and we're all going to university, and we're all learning about how we can help. And of course, doing an environmental science degree means I'm like actively trying to solve the problem. So that does make me feel more positive as well.
I love that. I think being in a community of like-minded people who are also trying to make change, it makes all the difference. And I love that you've been able to find that. And now I have a question that might be very scary, so don't
Mhm.
take it as that. But what is next for you when you're finished studying environmental
Yeah,
science and you have all of these skills? How are
yeah,
you kind of envisioning your future? That can be like far down the line. I know this is a very scary question, so take that however you'd like. But yeah, what's next? What are you thinking
yeah.
about
I
next?
think it can be really scary for, people making this transition from youth campaigning into sort of the wider world. A couple of months ago, I finished up a lot of my roles. So I was previously for a couple of years doing a lot of work with, like I mentioned in my introduction, the UK government and education ministers. I was one of the Department for Education Youth Focal Points for Sustainability. So that was doing a lot of work with civil servants and policymakers themselves, trying to put young people at the heart of the education system. But, that sort of ended quite abruptly. Three new people took over, which is amazing. But that sort of transition period out of that, where I was doing so much to then have a sort of a lull, that was really difficult. And then I've sort of had this weird summer period where I haven't really known exactly what was next. I'm in a couple of sort of advisory young trustee roles, which is really exciting. I'm really excited to see where those go. But, I think this is something that's echoed with a lot of people. I'm about to finish uni. I'm aging out of the youth category. um, and it's hard to know what is next, but I'm really excited. I'm hoping to sort of see where things go after graduation. Ultimately, I'd really love to have a career in policy in the civil service, but we'll see. And, if there's anyone out there that's sort of in a similar position, doesn't know what they're doing, I think that's totally normal. I know a lot of people that are, 2, 3 years into the job search, and it doesn't come quickly. So if you're in that same position at the beginning, just keep going. There is something out there for you. But it's hard. You just have to keep persevering. And it's okay to feel like you're lost, because I think a lot of us do feel that same feeling a lot.
I love that you're talking about that because I think that is such a common feeling
Yeah.
and everyone feels very alone in it. But I think that it's wonderful that you're putting it out there and it's not something that is unique to anyone. I think that's something that
No.
everyone is experiencing, especially in the job market right now and stuff. That only makes it worse.
Oh, in trying to get a graduate role in the UK is impossible.
Yes. So sending the good vibes for you with all of what's next. But you offered some good advice there at the end of that last answer. But I would love to offer more advice to our listeners. I think
Yeah,
that you are in a position that so many people can resonate with. And especially, as you said, getting closer to that not being considered a young person. I think that's something that I've also
that's
felt
scary.
very scary. So I also resonate with where you're at. But lots of young people want to create change and make a difference, but they might not know how to get started with a lot of that work. What advice do you have for those people who might be listening?
Yeah. I think the best advice I ever heard was to say yes before you're ready and to just take that first step. I think that also can be really, really scary, but you know you're doing it right when you're a little bit terrified. I don't think anything that, so many people say nothing worth having ever came easy, but it's so true. You just have to take the first step, and it's terrifying and it is so scary. You don't know what you're doing. You're stepping into the unknown, but once you start taking that first step and then taking the next one, that's when you're walking. That's when you start running. It just takes that little bit of momentum. The hardest part is to start building that momentum.
It was great to talk with Jodie, and I could see, and hopefully you could hear, how passionate she is about the work she's doing as a climate justice campaigner. I am so excited to follow along with Jodie's work in the future, because I think she is a great example of someone who is taking the challenges that she faces and figuring out a way to change them. Jodie started her work on Teach the Teacher because of her experience having a teacher who was a climate denier. She took that experience and turned it into a movement for herself and other young people to teach their teachers, which is the perfect example of being the change you wish to see in the world. So take Jodie's story as inspiration to address the problems or challenges you might be facing, and keep in mind, as Jodie shared at the end of our conversation, that change comes when you say yes before you're ready. Thank you so much for listening to this episode, and you can find Jodie on Instagram and LinkedIn, and I included those links in the description of this episode. If you want to talk about anything I mentioned, please reach out to me by email at lily@bethechangepodcast.org or on Instagram at Be The Change Media Network. I'm working on expanding Be The Change Media Network, which means bringing you more inspiring stories from amazing guests. If you enjoyed this episode, I would really appreciate it if you could leave the podcast a rating and a comment, because it will help these stories to reach, educate, and inspire more people. And I would also love to hear your thoughts and feedback. Tune in for my next episode, but until then, be the change you wish to see in the world. Bye, guys.